Okay everyone, this is the cog replacement video. I'll tell you some things that you need to look for as far as what we're doing. You got plate bolts that we have to deal with. Those are the two main bolts that release the plate itself. Once we get that done, we're dealing with snap rings that are on each rod, and those particular rods need to be able to move, so those clips have to come off. The bearings that are in the plate, those need to come off, and they will come out once you release the clips. Pressure plate itself is what holds all of this together, whether it be for each gear or the bearings. It has to basically be taken off completely, so be taking it off from the side. There are two bolts inside of those silver donuts is what we call them. Each one of those are a locking mechanism for each slide rod that you have in the cutter itself. So those donuts on the two front and back, those two need to be loosened, and that large pulley system itself, the belt itself will be coming off to where you can get some pressure off of it. Dealing with what we're dealing with is the cog replacement. This is an old one that has been busted, and as you can see, the teeth are not anywhere useful. This one here has run down teeth, and the extra adhesives that stick to the cogs, always make sure these are clean. Showing this is a brand new set. Sharp teeth, long points, this is what makes your stencil run. As long as you have this right here in this territory, as far as your points and things, everything should work as far as your hole punch, so you should be able to go through it. As far as going through the system, this is the beginning of it. You take out from those two bolts, you have to release those two bolts. Once those are released and those are taken out, then you can relieve that plate and use it where you need to. Everything is connected, so you may have to clip tie rods. You may have to, move things around and jiggle a little just to make sure that things come loose from where those bearings and those clips are on. Each one of those, as you can see, we're taking off the clips here, and those little clips need to be taken off from both sides. Once you drop the side panels on the system, you take those two from the front and back rod, and that way you're able to get to the point to where you can move that rod to where you can release the cogs. This plate can be a little difficult to come off at times, but you just have to work with it. We do have to, get into possibilities of using harder tools to get to it, but once you get it to where you can release what you have, then that plate will come off and you're able to get to the rest of the system. Now, as far as the front rod and the back rod, those are the only two that you have to maneuver. You do not have to take that center one off. But here's where on those silver donuts there are two locking hex head screws. You have to loosen those to get it to where that donut itself will slide, and you don't necessarily have to take them off, but it's not going to hurt anything. And if you bump the clip that's on the inside bearing, it also helps to release it, but it's not a have to situation. The cog rod will slide out of the machine, as you'll see here in just a second. It'll slide from one side to the other once you release those clips. Now, once that rod slides from side to side and is released, then you're able to take the cogs and loosen each one from the rod itself. Each cog has a little plastic flat flathead screw locking mechanism in it. Loosen those up, and as you can see that you're able to move those particular pieces. Slide these completely off the machine and just take them off one at a time. You have to make sure that you put them back with one of the cogs first. Don't just grab the flat one and stick it on there, but take that cog and run it. And the best way to do it is to put each one on to where the flathead screw is in the same general direction as far as being facing up. That way, if you have to change anything at any time later on down the road, then all of those screws are facing in one direction. It makes it easier when you're trying to deal with stencil and putting it on and off. Once you slide those on, get those in place. They don't have to be perfect as far as in place, but take those and put them on, and then slide it back into each rod and spread them, back out just a little, just to make sure you've got what you need as far as them being where they're supposed to be. And then once you do that, you put the clip back on one side, on the left side, and then that way you can keep that rod steady. It doesn't move on you the way to where it causes you a problem later on down the road. Getting to the back bar is a little bit harder just simply because you have the motor head that's in the way, but it's not that big of a deal. You just have to make sure you can get to each flathead plastic screw. Some of the end pieces where the cogs are do have metal Allen wrench heads in those, but it's just about when the machine was made is what it amounts to, and you will have those every once in a while. It's not a problem, it's not an issue. You just leave them in there, or you can switch them out and put in plastic screw nuts in each one. So basically you do the same thing on the back one as you did on the front one. You just make sure that you put them on in the right order. The toothed cog is first, and then put the flat ones, and then put the toothed cog at the end. Not that difficult. And once you get it back into place and get it into the bearing on the other end, put your clip back on it, and you're good to go as far as having those pieces put in. This job basically takes about an hour to an hour and a half to do completely. So it's not something that you just, pop them in, pop them off, go with it, and it takes 5 minutes. It is a little time consuming simply because you do have to take off both side panels and make it work. Going from there, make sure that they're in place. Lock each one back down to where they're supposed to be. Match them up with the pressure plate bar where you have your black pressure plate cams on there, and then that way they lay on top of each other where they're supposed to, and you can take them and that way your stencil stays full pressure. We grab a hold to it and put things on. We don't necessarily do that until the last minute to make sure once we put stencil on, everything is put into place where it's supposed to be, and then we can work it from there. And once you get all of those tightened up and get everything back into place, you can start to get each piece locked down, and that way everything's where it's supposed to be until we get to the point to where we need to put the end caps and the bearings and the clips back onto the right side of the machine. And looking at it, if you look to the left, you can see where the ribbon is that's connected to the keypad. Always make sure that you hook that back up to the left side to the keypad and make sure you hook it back up correctly. That can cause you issues if you do not hook that thing back up in the right place, the right way. So just make sure you do that. Now, before we put every bit of locking mechanism back onto the right side, take some stencil, run it through it, and what I did there was take a rubber band and lift that knife blade when the power is off. What we're trying to do is we have to, it's like a timing mechanism. You have to get the hole punch in the right direction, and those cogs, once you loosen those silver donuts, they're completely loose. So put the stencil on the front ones, lock it down as far as the donut. Once you get the stencil on there, lock that silver donut down and go from there as far as pulling the stencil to the back. Those cogs in the back will still be moving freely, so you're able to turn those and get the teeth into the hole punch to where it's the same front, same back, just where it would be tight enough to where it's holding that stencil tight. You don't want to get it to where it's stretching the hole punch, but you want it to where it's, you know, pulling on it pretty good. Again, lock the front one first and make sure that donut is locked down, and then you can move it just a little bit on the back side, just enough to get it into where it's supposed to be. Once you get the timing and stuff down, again, like I said, make sure you hook the keypad back up, put those screws back in, and then on the other side, take the bearings, put those back into the plate, and run those through the system, as far as putting them in and making sure that those bearings are inside of that plate and they're in there to where they're supposed to be. Take the plate and put it back on to the rods, and make sure your clips are back on to hold those bearings in place. And once you do that, then you can put the bolts back into each end of the pressure plate. That keeps that away from the system. You've got the belt and everything is back on. Everything is back in place, and you just have to make sure everything's locked down. That's your biggest key to it. Once you go in and you put in all the rods and all the bolts, put everything back into place, you can go in and make sure all of that's locked into place without any question. Sometimes that one particular bolt on each side, it can be a little difficult. You just have to move it around and make sure you find the hole. Once you've got everything locked into place, put your cover back on and put your screws back in, and you should be basically good to go. Again, this is takes about an hour to an hour and a half. Run the system, through a test when you get through. Make sure the stencil is where it's at. Make sure your cogs are catching the hole punch where it's supposed to. And once you do that, you're good to go.